Premiums and deductibles often starts with a detail people overlook. Picture the situation where a premium is what you pay to keep coverage active. A driver pays monthly even if no accident happens. The premium buys the promise of protection for covered losses. The moment becomes easier to handle when the moving part is named clearly in Premiums vs Deductibles Explained. The safer move in Premiums vs Deductibles Explained is to test the facts before acting on the first impression. Premiums and deductibles becomes clearer in a concrete situation. The clearest version is when a deductible is what you pay when a covered claim happens. A homeowner may pay the first amount before insurance contributes. The deductible shares the loss with the policyholder. That mechanism explains why the topic affects real choices in Premiums vs Deductibles Explained. In this situation, the deductible shares the loss with the policyholder is the part that usually creates the real consequence. Premiums and deductibles changes the decision before anyone names it. In Premiums vs Deductibles Explained, someone may notice that lower premiums often come with higher deductibles. A policy may look cheaper each month but cost more during a loss. The risk is shifted from regular payments to future claims. Seeing the cause early gives people more room to respond well in Premiums vs Deductibles Explained. A careful response starts by noticing how lower premiums often come with higher deductibles connects to the risk is shifted from regular payments to future claims. Premiums and deductibles has a cost that appears later. Watch what happens when higher premiums can buy lower deductibles. Paying more monthly may reduce the shock after an accident. Some people prefer predictable cost over sudden bills. In Premiums vs Deductibles Explained, the visible event can distract from the driver that needs attention. That is the point where Premiums vs Deductibles Explained becomes a real decision rather than an abstract idea. Premiums and deductibles depends on timing as much as facts. Premiums vs Deductibles Explained becomes concrete when deductibles discourage small claims. A minor repair below the deductible may not involve insurance at all. The policy is designed for larger losses. When Premiums vs Deductibles Explained appears in real life, this is the detail to check first. The safer move in Premiums vs Deductibles Explained is to test the facts before acting on the first impression. Premiums and deductibles can look simple from outside. For example, different coverages can have different deductibles. Home, auto, wind, theft, or health benefits may not use one single amount. The declarations page can show separate rules. In Premiums vs Deductibles Explained, this is the point where the visible choice and the real pressure start to meet. In this situation, the declarations page can show separate rules as the part that usually creates the real consequence. Premiums and deductibles creates pressure in ordinary life. In real life, health insurance adds more moving parts. Premiums, deductibles, copays, coinsurance, and out-of-pocket maximums interact. Monthly cost alone does not show total exposure. That is why Premiums vs Deductibles Explained should be read through facts rather than a quick assumption. A careful response starts by noticing how health insurance adds more moving parts connects to monthly cost alone does not show total exposure. Premiums and deductibles is shaped by rules and incentives. Think about how cash flow matters. A freelancer with irregular income may prefer a predictable premium even if it costs more overall. Financial stability affects risk tolerance. For Premiums vs Deductibles Explained, the important move is to notice the chain from first signal to final effect. That is the point where Premiums vs Deductibles Explained becomes a real decision rather than an abstract idea. Premiums and deductibles becomes risky when assumptions replace evidence. A simple Premiums vs Deductibles Explained case is this. Claim frequency changes the decision. Someone who rarely files claims may accept a higher deductible. Someone with likely medical visits or property risk may choose differently. That sequence explains why Premiums versus Deductibles Explained can grow even when the first moment looks small. The safer move in Premiums versus Deductibles Explained is to test the facts before acting on the first impression. Premiums and deductibles is easier to handle when the moving parts are visible. Premiums versus Deductibles Explained appears when emergency savings influence the trade-off. A person with enough savings can handle a larger deductible. Without savings, a high deductible can make insurance hard to use. The early sign matters in Premiums versus Deductibles Explained because it can change cost, trust, timing, or emotional meaning. In this situation, without savings, a high deductible can make insurance hard to use as the part that usually creates the real consequence. Premiums and Deductibles has both a visible side and a quieter side. One ordinary Premiums versus Deductibles Explained version is that insurers price deductibles because behavior changes. Sharing cost can reduce unnecessary claims and careless behavior. Deductibles manage both expenses and incentives. The pattern in Premiums versus Deductibles Explained is easier to handle when the first signal is noticed instead of dismissed. A careful response starts by noticing how insurers price deductibles because behavior changes connects to deductibles manage both expenses and incentives. Premiums and deductibles can turn small choices into larger consequences. Consider the moment when renewal is a good time to compare. Life changes, savings, and risk exposure may shift each year. Yesterday's deductible choice may not fit today. The answer in Premiums versus Deductibles Explained is usually found in the cause, not in the label people attach afterward. That is the point where Premiums versus Deductibles Explained becomes a real decision rather than an abstract idea. Premiums and Deductibles rewards preparation more than guessing. Premiums versus Deductibles Explained becomes clearer when a low premium can hide a bad fit. A buyer may celebrate savings until a claim exposes the deductible. Monthly affordability is only half the story. Once the cause is named in Premiums versus Deductibles Explained, the response can fit the situation more closely. The safer move in Premiums versus Deductibles Explained is to test the facts before acting on the first impression. Premiums and deductibles can be misunderstood when people focus on one number. In Premiums versus Deductibles Explained, notice when businesses use deductibles strategically. A company may retain small losses and insure catastrophic ones. Deductibles can be part of risk management. The link between those pieces is what makes Premiums versus Deductibles Explained useful in real life. In this situation, deductibles can be part of risk management is the part that usually creates the real consequence. Premiums and deductibles affects trust because expectations are involved. A familiar Premiums versus Deductibles Explained example is when deductibles may apply per claim or per period. One policy may charge each event while another tracks an annual amount. The wording changes the customer's exposure. People often feel pressure around Premiums versus Deductibles Explained before they can explain where it came from. A careful response starts by noticing how deductibles may apply per claim or per period connects to the wording changes the customer's exposure. Premiums and deductibles works differently for different people. In Premiums versus Deductibles Explained, the real-world version may be that discount comparisons should use yearly math. Saving a small monthly amount may not justify a much larger deductible. The numbers need to be compared over time. This is the detail that changes what to check next in Premiums versus Deductibles Explained. That is the point where Premiums versus Deductibles Explained becomes a real decision rather than an abstract idea. Premiums and deductibles should be checked before money or emotion is committed. It shows up in small moments, such as when claims below the deductible still matter. Damage should be documented even if insurance does not pay. Records help if related problems appear later. Noticing that driver early can keep Premiums versus Deductibles Explained from becoming harder to manage. The safer move in Premiums versus Deductibles Explained is to test the facts before acting on the first impression. Premiums and deductibles becomes easier to manage when records are clear. Look at a case where premium and deductible choices reveal risk preference. Some people buy certainty while others keep more risk themselves. Neither choice is automatically correct. The headline alone does not show the whole chain behind Premiums versus Deductibles Explained. In this situation, neither choice is automatically correct is the part that usually creates the real consequence. Premiums and deductibles requires a specific next step rather than a vague hope. A concrete version is when the policy should be usable on a bad day. Coverage that looks affordable but cannot be accessed during a claim is weak protection. Deductible size should be tested against real cash. The background force should guide the next decision in Premiums versus Deductibles Explained more than the first reaction. A careful response starts by noticing how the policy should be usable on a bad day connects to deductible size should be tested against real cash. Premiums and deductibles matters because the result is felt in daily life. In a normal day, premiums and deductibles are two sides of the insurance bargain. One is the cost of keeping protection and the other is the cost of using it. Choosing well means looking beyond the cheapest monthly price and asking what happens when a claim actually arrives. In Premiums versus Deductibles Explained, the clearer reading follows the cause instead of stopping at the visible result. That is the point where Premiums versus Deductibles Explained becomes a real decision rather than an abstract idea.